Daytona USA is arguably the most important racing game ever made, introducing a level of visual fidelity and fluidity beyond anything in the arcade scene at that time. Sega's Model 2 arcade board set a new standard for arcade visuals, spawning titles like Virtua Fighter 2, Virtua Cop 1 and 2, Sega Rally, Sega Touring Car, Last Bronx, Fighting Vipers, Virtua Lawn. I'm running out of breath listing them, but you get the idea. Model 2 games would go on to become the hallmark of the SEGA Saturn, with all of the above games and more making their way to Sega's 32-bit system. But of all the ports, there's one which in my opinion has become something of a guilty pleasure for many, and that's Daytona USA. Now, I'm not going to spend any time in this video telling you guys the history of Daytona USA or the differences between the original port and Championship Circuit Edition. There's plenty of videos out there doing a great job of that already. In this video, I want to talk about why the original Saturn port of Daytona USA is so damn good, and why so many Saturn fans from back in the day and newcomers love this port so much. I also want to address today's narrative that Daytona on the Saturn was poorly received back in the day. You see, there's a long-standing and accepted narrative in the community that Daytona USA on Saturn was review bombed back in the day when it launched, that reviewers slammed the pop-in, called the game terrible, said it was unplayable. Back in 1995, at 16 years old, I didn't care about pop-in, I didn't care about frame rates. I'd come from a Commodore Amiga and 3D was exciting and new on the Saturn. Previous home attempts at any form of 3D had moved slowly and lacked detail, and a game that comes to mind is Microprose's Stunt Car Racer on the Amiga. Now, this is one of the Amiga's best racing games, but Daytona USA on the Saturn was another level. So let's cut to the chase. The fact is that Daytona USA on the Saturn reviewed well. Very well. Computer and Video Games, 96%. Digitizer, one of the Saturn's harshest critics, 90%. Mean Machine Sega, 96%. Maximum, 5 stars. Sega Power, 87%. Official Sega Magazine, who would go on to become Sega Saturn Magazine, 94%. And Edge with an 8 out of 10. And that's just some of the reviews. What I want to do is focus on 2 reviews in particular, because firstly they're not Sega affiliated, and secondly because one is historically hard to please and the other was one of the Saturn's harshest critics in the UK back in the day as the generation wore on. So let's take a look at Digitizer. Now, our friends outside the UK will be looking at the screen right now and asking, what the hell is this? This, my friends, is called teletext, an information service accessed via the remote control on TVs in the 90s that had everything: news, horoscopes, sports results, holiday bookings, and yes, game reviews. Now, let's remind ourselves of the narrative spun today. Daytona USA on the Saturn was slammed for its bad graphics, for its pop-in, and for being inferior to Ridge Racer. Let's take a look at what Digitizer had to say in its Saturn launch special on July 12th, 1995. Daytona USA isn't perfect, but what did you expect? The silky smooth lines of a £4,000 coin-op and a £400 console? The polygon clipping isn't anywhere near as bad as some mags have made out. It's plainly an impressive looking game. Very impressive. Having said that, it isn't full screen, which is a bit of a shame. So, just to address that final point there, the PAL version has major PAL optimization to match the speed of the NTSC version, but sadly the aspect ratio isn't optimized, resulting in the large letterbox borders. Let's get back to Digitizer. The 3 courses offer the fastest and most complete racing environments yet seen in the home, and the gameplay is next to faultless in every aspect. We feel Daytona may prove a better investment than PlayStation's graphically superior Ridge Racer, and ultimately, a lot more fun. And the summary, where one key line stands out above all others, the one thing that myself, Dan, Saturn Dave, even John Linneman has touched on, is that this is the arcade version. which comes down to the gameplay, the handling and the power sliding. Let's move on to Edge. They address the pop-in on Saturn, stating that it's evidence of a rush job rather than a lack of power, noting that even the arcade version has pop-in, albeit much further in the horizon due to the lack of video memory on the first iteration of the Model 2 board. The review goes on to say that while it looks like Ridge Racer has established an unassailable lead over Daytona, that's without taking into account the most important criteria, gameplay. And it's here where Edge absolutely nails it. Devotees of the coin-op will be reassured to learn that Daytona on Saturn has retained almost all of the features that made the original and arguably more substantial experience than Ridge Racer. Power slides, collisions, maniacally swerving competitors and sophisticated artificial intelligence all help to compensate for any initial disappointment in the graphics. And there it is, right there. The very argument that fans of the original Saturn version have banged the drum about for years. The game has its flaws visually due to a rush job on the port, but the arcade gameplay and its handling, the very soul of Daytona USA, has come to the Saturn intact. Edge go on to comment on the AI of the rival cars, which is something that was greatly reduced in Championship Circuit Edition and even Daytona 2001 on the Dreamcast. Edge say, instead of getting in your way by accident rather than design, rival cars intelligently block your path with violent swerving manoeuvres. This gives the game added depth, especially as the cars jostle for position amongst themselves. The excitement is enhanced by the fact there are up to 40 cars on the track at once. Surprisingly, despite the high number of vehicles, there's little slowdown. It's an impressive endorsement of the machine that the action maintains a decent pace. Now, all of the reviews carry a similar trend, that the gameplay is key, the arcade handling is there, and that the game is incredibly playable. And that's why we love it. That's why we defend it when voice after voice call Daytona on Saturn a shitty racing game that's worse than Ridge Racer. Now, given the gulf between Sega's Model 2 and Namco's System 22, Daytona running on the Saturn is a far greater technical achievement than Ridge Racer running on PlayStation. And while Ridge Racer is perceived to be arcade perfect on PlayStation, it also runs at half the frame rate of the arcade original. Now, I want to stress that this video is in no way intended to be a slant on Ridge Racer. I love that series, I've got a lot of fond memories of it, and Rage Racer and Ridge Racer Type 4 are two of the best racing games I've ever played. Sadly, Daytona USA on Saturn has fallen victim to the all too common trend in retro gaming of narratives being passed on, aided by misinformation, a misrepresentation of the era, and the toxicity of negative video titles for clicks. It feels like it's more fun and even accepted to be negative about a game these days, and where's the fun in that? We want to champion Daytona on Saturn for what it is, an ambitious, beautifully flawed but incredibly playable version of one of Sega's most iconic and historically important titles. And while there are far better ways to play Daytona USA today, be that via emulation or the Xbox 360 or PS3 ports, it's time to stop the narrative that Daytona USA launched on Saturn, got hammered by reviews, wasn't worth playing, and that Ridge Racer trounced it. When you have Saturn Daytona running, when that pad is in your hand and you're nailing corner after corner and holding a power slide until that very last second before spinning out, jostling with that rival AI, it feels incredible, even at 20 frames per second, and no amount of pop-in can spoil that feeling. And so we're almost at the end of the video. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this one, and thank you for entertaining one of my more personal videos. It's a combination of two topics that I'm really passionate about, those being misinformation in retro gaming and Daytona USA on the Saturn. I really hope that I've managed to provide some insight into the thoughts of gamers and reviewers who laid eyes on Daytona on Saturn back in 1995, and that you perhaps pick the game up and look at it a little differently yourself, perhaps even with a little more appreciation. History has been told in such a way over the years that Saturn Daytona's gameplay has been forgotten about and overlooked by many people, with Ridge Racer's arcade accuracy and graphics held up as to why it's superior. And yet, despite all that, with Saturn Daytona, the very soul of the arcade game is inside, screaming to be heard. The narrative around Saturn Daytona is wrong, and it's time to stop spinning it. So, what are your views on Daytona on the Sega Saturn? Get involved in the comments, get in touch via X, join us on the Discord. You can find me at the SEGAHolic, you can find Dan the Mega Driver at super_D, and the channel account is of course at Sega Guys. Until next time, we will see you on the Sega side.